Monica Williams had built her airline empire from a single regional route to a global network. But today she was flying as an anonymous passenger to investigate discrimination complaints from black travelers. When the racist flight attendant saw her in first class and immediately began questioning her right to be there, Monica knew she was experiencing exactly the kind of treatment that had prompted her undercover investigation. The attendant's aggressive profiling and humiliating service would not only expose systematic racism in her own company, but destroy the career of someone too prejudiced to recognize her own boss. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Los Angeles International Airport as Monica Williams made her way through the bustling terminal. At 41, she was the founder and CEO of Skyline Airways, one of the fastest-growing airlines in North America, with routes spanning 3 continents and a fleet of over 2. But today she wasn't traveling in the luxury of a private jet or enjoying the VIP treatment that usually accompanied her business trips. Today she was conducting what she privately called Operation Customer Truth. For the past 4 months, Monica had received a steady stream of discrimination complaints from black passengers describing humiliating experiences aboard Skyline Airways flight. The complaints painted a disturbing picture. Black travelers being questioned about their seat assignments, subjected to extra security screening, treated with suspicion by flight attendants, and made to feel unwelcome despite paying full fare for their ticket. When Monica brought these concerns to her executive team, they had dismissed them as isolated incidents and assured her that their crew training programs addressed appropriate customer service standards. But Monica's instincts told her there was more to the story. She had built Skyline Airways on the principle that air travel should be accessible and dignified for everyone, regardless of background or appearance. If systematic discrimination was happening on her flights, she needed to experience it firsthand. Monica had carefully planned this undercover mission, booking herself on Flight 447 from LAX to JFK under a slightly modified version of her name. She had chosen first class specifically because several complaints had mentioned black passengers being questioned about their presence in premium cabins. Everything about her appearance today signaled wealth and success: a tailored Armani suit, Italian leather shoes, and jewelry that cost more than most people's annual salary. She carried herself with the confidence that came from years of running board meetings and negotiating multi-million-dollar deals. As Monica approached Gate 23, she observed the usual pre-flight activity. Passengers lined up for boarding, gate agents processed tickets, and crew members prepared for departure. She had flown this route countless times as CEO, but never as an anonymous passenger. The difference in perspective was already revealing. Flight attendant Sandra Phillips was conducting her pre-flight briefing with the cabin crew when she noticed Monica approaching the gate area. At 34, Sandra had worked for Skyline Airways for 8 years, and she prided herself on maintaining what she called cabin standards. In her warped worldview, first-class passengers should look and behave in ways that matched her personal expectations of wealth and sophistication. When she saw Monica, a black woman in her early 40s, despite her obviously expensive clothing, Sandra's prejudices immediately activated. The boarding process began with first-class passengers, and Monica presented her boarding pass with the same calm confidence she brought to corporate presentations. The gate agent processed her ticket without issue, but Sandra noticed the interaction from her position near the jetway entrance. "Excuse me," Sandra called out as Monica proceeded toward the aircraft entrance. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" Monica turned, recognizing the request as unusual but maintaining her professional composure. She handed over her boarding pass, noting that the gate agent had already verified it moments before. Sandra examined the boarding pass with exaggerated scrutiny, comparing Monica's appearance to the name on the ticket as if searching for evidence of fraud. "Monica Wilson," she read aloud, not recognizing the slight variation of her CEO's name. "First class, seat 2A. The verification was unnecessary and clearly discriminatory. Monica had observed dozens of passengers board without having their tickets re-examined by flight attendants. Sandra was implementing enhanced screening based solely on Monica's race, exactly the kind of treatment that had prompted this investigation. "Is there a problem?" Monica asked calmly, her tone professional but pointed. "Just making sure everything is in order," Sandra replied, her voice carrying a subtle edge of suspicion. "We maintain certain standards in our premium cabin." The comment was loaded with racist implications. Sandra was essentially suggesting that Monica's presence in first class required special verification because she didn't fit the attendant's preconceived notions of who belonged in premium seating. It was a microaggression designed to make Monica feel questioned and unwelcome. Monica accepted her boarding pass back and proceeded to her seat, mentally documenting every aspect of the discriminatory encounter. She had been flying first class for over a decade, and no flight attendant had ever questioned her ticket after it had been processed by gate agents. Sandra's behavior was clearly motivated by racial bias. As Monica settled into seat 2A, she observed Sandra's interactions with other first-class passengers. White travelers were greeted warmly, offered pre-departure beverages, and treated with the kind of attentive service that Skyline Airways promised in its marketing materials. The contrast with her own reception was stark and undeniable. Sandra approached Monica's seat with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Can I offer you a pre-departure beverage?" she asked, her tone noticeably cooler than the warm hospitality she had shown other passengers. "Champagne, please," Monica replied, requesting the same premium service offered to other first-class travelers. Sandra's hesitation was brief but telling. "I'll need to see your identification to verify your age for alcohol service," she said, implementing yet another unnecessary verification step that she hadn't required from other passengers. Monica produced her driver's license, observing Sandra's reaction as she examined the document. The ID confirmed Monica's identity and age, but Sandra seemed disappointed not to find any discrepancies that would justify her suspicions. "Wilson," Sandra read aloud again, making a show of comparing the license to the boarding pass. "Different from your usual documentation." The question was invasive and inappropriate. Sandra was essentially asking Monica to explain why her legal name might vary from what appeared on her identification, a line of inquiry that bordered on harassment. No airline employee should be interrogating passengers about personal documentation unless there were legitimate security concerns. "It's my professional name," Monica replied calmly, providing more explanation than Sandra deserved, but wanting to document the full extent of the discriminatory treatment. Sandra made notes on her service pad, as if Monica's perfectly legal use of a professional name was somehow suspicious. The behavior was becoming increasingly aggressive and obviously motivated by racial bias rather than legitimate airline procedures. As the aircraft filled with passengers, Monica noticed that Sandra continued to monitor her more closely than other travelers. When Monica pulled out her laptop to work during the boarding process, Sandra approached again. "Excuse me, but electronic devices need to be stowed during boarding," Sandra said, implementing a rule that didn't exist and that she wasn't enforcing with other passengers. Monica looked around the cabin, noting several other passengers using phones, tablets, and laptops without interference from crew members. "I see other passengers using electronic devices," she observed diplomatically. "Those are different circumstances," Sandra replied dismissively, offering no explanation for why Monica's laptop use would be problematic while identical behavior from white passengers was acceptable. Monica complied with the discriminatory request, closing her laptop and stowing it in her carry-on bag. She was documenting a clear pattern of selective enforcement, double standards, and discriminatory treatment that confirmed everything her complaint data had suggested. The flight took off on schedule, and Sandra began the first-class service routine. Again, the disparity in treatment was obvious and documented by Monica's careful observation. Other passengers received prompt, attentive service with genuine smiles and professional courtesy. Monica's interactions with Sandra were marked by delays, minimal communication, and an attitude that suggested she was somehow imposing on the flight attendant's time. When meal service began, Sandra approached Monica's seat with obvious reluctance. "We have 2 entree options today," she said, not bothering to describe the choices as she had for other passengers. "I'll need to check if we have your preference available." The statement was clearly designed to suggest that Monica might not receive her first choice, despite being among the first passengers served in the premium cabin. Sandra was creating artificial scarcity and suggesting that Monica's meal options might be limited, another form of discriminatory service designed to make her feel like a second-class passenger despite paying first-class fares. "What are the options?" Monica asked, maintaining her professional demeanor while mentally documenting the service disparity. Sandra provided minimal descriptions of the available meals, offering none of the detailed explanations or recommendations she had given other passengers. When Monica made her selection, Sandra responded with skepticism. "Are you sure that's what you want?" she asked, as if Monica couldn't be trusted to choose her own meal appropriately. The question was condescending and inappropriate. Sandra was treating Monica like someone who didn't understand fine dining or premium airline service, assumptions based solely on racial stereotypes rather than Monica's obvious sophistication and success. Throughout the meal service, Sandra's discriminatory behavior continued. She served Monica's food with minimal explanation, didn't offer wine pairings that she had suggested to other passengers, and failed to check back to ensure meal satisfaction as was standard protocol for first-class service. But the most telling incident occurred when another passenger's call button wasn't working properly. Sandra walked past Monica's seat multiple times while addressing the technical issue, clearly avoiding interaction unless absolutely necessary. When Monica finally got her attention to request something simple, extra napkins, Sandra's response was telling. "You'll need to wait," Sandra said curtly. "I'm dealing with a priority situation." The priority situation was helping a white passenger adjust his reading light, a task that took less than 30 seconds. Sandra was explicitly telling Monica that her needs were less important than those of other passengers, a clear demonstration of discriminatory service priority. Monica had seen enough. The pattern of discrimination was undeniable, well documented, and exactly what her complaint data had described. But she decided to test Sandra's prejudices one more time before revealing her identity. "Excuse me," Monica said, calling Sandra over with the calm authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "I'd like to speak with the lead flight attendant about the service I've received today." Sandra's expression shifted to one of annoyance mixed with concern. "Is there a problem with your service?" she asked, her tone suggesting that any complaints would be Monica's fault rather than the result of discriminatory treatment. "Yes, there is," Monica replied evenly. "I've been subjected to different standards than other passengers, questioned about documentation that was already verified, and treated with obvious bias throughout this flight." Sandra's defensive response was immediate and revealing. "I treat all passengers equally," she said, her voice rising slightly. "If you're unsatisfied with standard airline service, perhaps you should consider flying with a different carrier in the future." The suggestion that Monica should take her business elsewhere was the final piece of evidence she needed. Sandra was essentially telling a paying customer to leave rather than acknowledge or address discriminatory treatment. It was exactly the kind of attitude that had driven the complaints Monica had been investigating. Monica made her decision. The discrimination audit had provided overwhelming evidence of systematic bias. It was time to reveal who Sandra had been targeting with her racist behavior. "I think we need to have a different conversation," Monica said, her voice carrying a new authority that made Sandra pause mid-response. Monica reached into her purse and produced her business card, setting it on the tray table where Sandra could see it clearly. "Monica Williams, Chief Executive Officer and Founder, Skyline Airways. This is my airline." Sandra stared at the business card as if it were written in a foreign language. The embossed logo, executive title and corporate contact information left no room for doubt about its authenticity. But Sandra's mind struggled to process the information. The black woman she had been discriminating against for the entire flight was the person who owned the company, employed her, and had the power to end her aviation career immediately. "I don't understand," Sandra stammered, her confident discriminatory attitude evaporating as the reality of the situation became clear. Monica's voice remained calm but carried unmistakable authority. "What you don't understand, Sandra, is that for the past 3 hours, you have been demonstrating exactly the kind of discriminatory behavior that black passengers have been reporting to my corporate office for months." The first-class cabin had grown quiet as other passengers realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Several people discreetly positioned themselves to observe the confrontation, sensing that Sandra's career was about to end at 3. You questioned my boarding pass after it was already verified. Monica continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the premium cabin. You demanded additional identification that you didn't require from other passengers. You implemented selective rules enforcement, provided substandard service, and explicitly told me to fly with a different carrier. All because of my race. Sandra tried to recover, her voice shaking. Ms. Williams, I was just following standard security protocols that you selectively apply based on skin color. Monica cut her off. Protocols that assume black passengers are lying about their seat assignments or using fraudulent documentation. Protocols that provide inferior service to customers who look like me. The other passengers were transfixed by the role reversal. Sandra had gone from discriminatory authority figure to desperate employee facing termination, while Monica had revealed herself as the ultimate authority on the aircraft. The power dynamic had completely shifted. Monica turned to address the gathered first-class passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed today is an example of airline discrimination in action. It's not always dramatic or obvious. It's the subtle questioning, the extra verification, the inferior service that some passengers receive based on race rather than the price of their ticket. She faced Sandra directly for her final statement. Your employment with Skyline Airways is terminated immediately upon landing. Today's incident will be fully documented and reported to federal aviation authorities as a civil rights violation. Sandra's career in aviation was over. Her discriminatory behavior had been witnessed by dozens of passengers and would be documented in her permanent employment record. Her assumptions about Monica's legitimacy and right to first-class service had cost her everything. But Monica wasn't finished. She had exposed individual discrimination, but real change would come from addressing the systematic issues that allowed such behavior to flourish throughout her airline. Over the following weeks, Monica implemented comprehensive reforms across Skyline Airways' entire operation. She mandated unconscious bias training for all flight attendants, established clear protocols for passenger interactions that prohibited racial profiling, and created an independent review board to investigate discrimination complaints. She also used cabin security footage from Sandra's discriminatory treatment as a training tool, showing her entire flight crew staff how subtle prejudices could manifest in customer service interaction. The video became required viewing for all Skyline Airways employees, a stark reminder of how discrimination could poison customer relationships and damage the company's reputation. The incident's impact extended beyond Skyline Airways. When Monica shared her experience at aviation industry conferences and in trade publications, it sparked conversations about discrimination in air travel across the entire sector. Other airlines began examining their own customer service practices, recognizing that systematic racism could exist even in businesses that prided themselves on hospitality and service excellence. Monica's passengers responded positively to her transparency and commitment to change. Rather than being embarrassed by the discrimination incident, they respected her willingness to personally investigate complaints and take concrete action to address problems. Customer satisfaction scores actually increased across Skyline Airways' entire network, as travelers appreciated flying with an airline that took discrimination seriously. The legal implications were significant as well. Monica's documentation of discriminatory treatment provided ammunition for civil rights attorneys representing other victims of airline discrimination. Her willingness to testify about racial profiling in aviation helped several passengers win substantial settlements against other carriers with similar practices. Sandra Phillips never worked as a flight attendant again. Her discriminatory treatment of Monica had been too public and too well documented for her to find employment with any reputable airline. Her assumptions about who belonged in first class had destroyed her career and served as a warning to others who might consider treating passengers differently based on skin color. 6 months after the incident, Monica took the same flight from LAX to JFK, this time announcing herself as the CEO from the moment she boarded. The difference in treatment was remarkable. Genuine hospitality, attentive service, and the kind of customer experience that air travel should provide to everyone regardless of race. As the plane descended toward New York, Monica reflected on the personal cost of her discrimination investigation. The experience had been humiliating and frustrating, but it had also been necessary. Her willingness to subject herself to prejudiced treatment had exposed systematic problems and created an opportunity for meaningful industry change. During the flight, a young black business traveler approached Monica in the terminal after recognizing her from news coverage of the incident. "Ms. Williams," he said, "I read about what happened on your flight last year. Thank you for making airlines a place where people like me can travel without being made to feel like criminals." Monica smiled, remembering why she had started Skyline Airways in the first place, to create travel experiences where dignity and respect were included in every ticket price, regardless of the passenger's background or appearance. The transformation of Skyline Airways became a case study in business schools and corporate training programs across the aviation industry. Monica's willingness to personally experience discrimination in her own company, document systematic problems, and implement meaningful changes demonstrated that ethical leadership could drive both social justice and business success. Her story reminded everyone that assumptions based on race weren't just morally wrong, they were also bad business that drove away customers, created legal liability, and damaged brand reputation. When airlines discriminate against passengers, they lose market share, face federal investigation, and suffer long-term damage to their corporate image. When they embrace inclusion, they build customer loyalty, attract diverse talent, and create sustainable competitive advantages. The flight attendant who had profiled Monica based on her race learned that discrimination has consequences that extend beyond individual careers. Discriminatory behavior poisoned work environments, created hostile customer experiences, and undermined the professional service standards that airlines needed to maintain in competitive markets. Sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger or legal action. It's the quiet authority that comes from owning the company where it occurs. Monica Williams had that authority, and she used it to transform not just her own airline, but the entire industry's approach to inclusive customer service. Her experience proved that when discrimination meets ownership, when prejudice confronts power, and when assumptions encounter reality, justice isn't just possible. The only question is whether the people implementing discriminatory policies will learn from their mistakes or be replaced by those who understand that professional service should be available to everyone who pays. When aviation industry publications wrote about the most important developments in customer service, they consistently mentioned the Skyline Airways incident as a turning point that forced the entire sector to confront its own discriminatory practices and embrace truly inclusive hospitality standards. Monica's willingness to transform a moment of personal discrimination into an opportunity for industry-wide reform had created lasting change that benefited millions of travelers. Her story became proof that sometimes the best way to fight systematic racism isn't from the outside, it's from the position of ultimate authority within the system itself.